All right, I think we can get started. Thanks so much to Yuvi Panda for staying up till 3:30 in the morning in Goa, India to join us. And would love to welcome all our guests to the panel on infrastructure, where we hope to be able to answer your questions on different approaches, mostly about how to host Jupyter Hubs, which is really a key to the success of how data science has really grown and expanded and been inclusive and accessible and has become just a huge thing at UC Berkeley. We wanted this to be a space for you to ask questions and also the people on the Jupyter Hub team to hear what your concerns are, what you're thinking about, because it also helps them. Because remember, they're building documentation all the time, and they're building ways that, you know, they would hope that other people would be able to use their tools. And they're building additional tools all the time. So, you know, certainly what you ask here as questions can be important feedback to this team. Really quick, another thing that I wanted to say was there's 2 panels on Thursday and Friday. One will be for a panel of people hosting Jupyter Hubs at different UCs and Cal States. So it's a nice time to hear how it's gone, implementing these kind of things at other places outside of Berkeley, and what can we share lessons learned, and what do we have across institutions. And then finally, there's one on Friday morning with some of our latest tools. Yuvi will be back with the chat tool. And Chris Piles hopefully will be along with the Otter tool, Chris Holdgraf with the Jupyter Book tool. So we'll have a few different, and Ryan Lovett, who's here on this call as well, will present the RStudio implementation. We can touch on those during this call, but on Friday morning, they will give little demos of each of those tools as part of that presentation. If I could ask really quick to the attendees, like Michael Grossberg, if it's possible, could you turn your video off just so that the people attending can turn their videos off, so then we see the videos. It just helps teams to realize who to present the videos of. Thanks, Michael. But for now, I want to start off by, I think Yuvi has a short slide deck of an overview of some of the things that he wants to show us. You're muted.
I'm unmuted now. Okay, thanks, Eric. That was great. Thank you for setting all the context. And I've been tuning into the whole workshop all evening, and this is totally worth staying up till 3:34. So I wanted to have a really quick run through of some of the most common questions we actually get when we run the infrastructure. And I pulled up some numbers to help with that as well. So okay, so this is numbers for the fall, for the spring semester that just got over, which is Jan to May. And throughout our various Jupyter Hubs, this is the number of users that we have served, which is anyone who's done anything with the 10 Jupyter Hubs we run. And cost-wise, this ended up being about $3 per semester per student. Hopefully, it'll be $2 per student in the fall because we are doing a bunch more optimization. And the median daily every day, including Saturdays and Sundays and spring break, this is the median number of users who are active every day. And you can see a graph here. You can see where spring break was, and you can see the weekly spikes and whatnot. This is just for the previous semester, and an infrastructure scales up and down pretty easily for all of that. We run on Google Cloud. We just use upstream Jupyter Hub components. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And we have no idea how many classes are actually using this. We have taken a very Berkeley approach to classes using this, which is we just tell them, sure, that sounds great. Use it for something cool and let us know. And then Eric finds out a while later that they've been using it for something cool, or he's been showing people how to do something cool with it. But in general, we try to drive down cost by optimizing things and doing some amount of technical innovation rather than try to put more like forms to fill or roadblocks in front of people before they can use our infrastructure. And that has worked out really, really well for like the Jupyter open source project, for all of the students who are learning, for the instructors who are trying to teach with it, and basically everyone involved, because it's also ended up being cheaper, I would like to think, than putting more paperwork in. We currently run 10 hubs. Setting up a new hub is going to take only an hour. The workshop hub that we've been using is one of the ones that we run. And some classes have their own hubs because they're really big, like Data 100 has its own Jupyter Hub because it's big, but now also because each user has their own PostgreSQL database. So we don't want to do that for the main data hub. And the R hub, for example, if you want to signal to users that R is a first-class citizen in the data science ecosystem, so we have a separate hub just for them that goes into our studio, and similar with Julia and a bunch of other spaces. And to follow on to that, we support not just Jupyter, not just Python. We have support for a bunch of other things. And this, I think our studios, Ryan Lovett, who's also here and is going to give a talk about this 2 days later. We support our studio in the hubs. That is, in the slides, if you're in here, you can see that there is a link to RStudio, which you click, it'll actually go to your workshop hub, and you can see that there's actually RStudio running here. And this is very helpful for a lot of R classes. Everyone I know who uses RStudio. So it's important that we support that fully. But we also support Jupyter Lab, which is a newer interface on top of Jupyter Notebooks that does a bunch of other things. You can do more complex stuff. And Data 100 and a bunch of other new classes use it. But we also have, there's lots of older software or different kinds of software that requires a desktop environment to run. So we actually even have people run a full-fledged Linux desktop environment inside the Jupyter hubs that we run. So of course you can run, Firefox. This is the primary reason I built this. So you can run Firefox inside Chrome, inside Jupyter Hub running somewhere. For some reason, by me, I mean Ryan Lovett again in this did a lot of the work in making this happen. And I know that, for example, EECS is using this for a bunch of their electronics classes for visualization and whatnot. So we support a bunch of different things. All our stuff is completely open infrastructure. We run completely in open source code, but not just open source code. All of the infrastructure configuration that we have is also open source. It's all on this GitHub repository. We try to use modern DevOps principles as much as possible. So any change to the infrastructure, from adding a new package to adding new admins, all goes through as pull requests into this. You can see, for example, Chris Files is actively working on Autograder and updating it all the time. And when and as soon as he opens the pull request, it's actually going to kick off it's building it to make sure it works. And then when it's built, we basically just hand out rights. Chris Files can basically just we trust both the system we have and him enough that he can just merge changes. So he doesn't have to wait on us. There is just me and some part of my time and some part of Jonathan Felder, who is also on this call. We are the only people who are officially paid to be on this, and we don't want to be blocking anyone. So if someone keeps asking us for stuff, we just give them rights to the repository and say yeah, go do it yourself. And that's worked out very well again, I think, for everyone involved. So you can go look at the repository and play around. We also have a public documentation site where we try to list, just keep documentation on both what we have for users and also as admins what the various configurations options are. If you're going there, the services offered might be the one that's most useful. You can go and check out and try out for yourself RStudio and Jupyter Lab and the various things that we offer there. yeah, this is just more graphs from GitHub that I already showed. But yeah, there's like a lot of contributors. Like everyone who's a contributor here has made a deployment to the Jupyter Hub there. And like that kind of empowerment is sort of like one of the core principles on which empowerment, laziness, I don't know which one you want to call it, because we don't want to be on the blocking line for like most people's anything. So, and like Eric really likes us showing this to people. So we collect metrics, of course, on like the system itself. And that helps us like, do this and like make sure things are optimized, optimize costs, look at and check out outages. And
is the workshop hub on the Grafana?
Yeah, it's on the Grafana. You can see that it's the purple. Let's see, this is for the last 30 minutes. Let me try last 2 days. So let's see what color it is now. The workshop is the light yellow. And what is the orange is Data Hub. So you can see the orange, which is the Summer Data Hub class, and the yellow is the workshop class, like this yellow. There's 2 yellows, unfortunately. They're different, but you can't tell. The yellow on top is the workshop hub, and the yellow on the bottom is Data 100. So you can actually see that there's data, like Data Hub is being used. So there's Data 8 Summer. Data 100 is being used, and that's Data 100 Summer. And then here is our workshop. So there's 76 people on Workshop Hub right now, but 230 people on Data 8 and 150 people on Data 100. But I can go back to this for like a month or 30 days or whatever, and it's very useful and makes nice graphs. And last 2 shout outs is, I think someone already mentioned, the Littlest Jupyter Hub. If you are setting this up for yourself and you have less than 100 users, Littlest Jupyter Hub is probably the way to go. This is one of the Jupyter Hub distributions that originated at Berkeley. In fact, I think 2 years ago for the pedagogy workshop. And the goal is that you, without really having any understanding of full cloud stuff, there's enough documentation there that you can get started and start on your course in like 15, 20 minutes. And Zero to Jupyter Hub is the more bigger one that also started at Berkeley that we use, that runs on like more fancy cloud stuff. So I was hoping that this would sort of help kickstart the AMA and like give people more context to ask questions from. And so then we can direct them to different people or to different resources and give people like a baseline to talk from. And I'm going to stop presenting now. Okay.
I have a starter question. How often does it break?
We haven't had like a major outage. So if you go to the docs website, it actually lists all the major outages we have had under incident reports. And I think we haven't really had one in like a year. There's been a few small ones where it's degraded for some users, but we haven't really had a major outage in like almost a year and a half, I think, early 2018.
I just unmuted myself. Do you want questions directly like this, or do you want us to raise hands or in the chat, or how do you want to do it?
What do you
Raise hands is great, but while you're here, go ahead, ask a question.
Okay, so one of the things that I'm having trouble with the documentation is I've used the Littlest Jupiter Hub to set that up, and I think I was at the workshop during the JupyterCon and went through the little Zero to Jupiter Hub on Kubernetes, and you guys had some great scripts. It was pretty straightforward. There's a lot of different moving parts. So you've got like the Autograder, you've got the binder aspect of things, you've got the and these things all talk to each other. You've got the Grafana to see the analytics. So one thing is that I don't have in my head, it's a little muddled, the picture of how these pieces all fit together. Are they is this a mono repo, or are they all in their own separate repos and you have to kind of blend them all together? Are you doing these on separate machines and there are APIs that are talking to each other? Like, how do all these pieces fit together?
Yeah, I can give a very quick overview. So I think of these as distributions, right? Like we take all these different open source components and put them together in ways that work for us, but that might not exactly be the same thing that works for you. So in our case, we run on Google Cloud, and we use Kubernetes to manage like the many different machines that we have. But from our perspective, we treat it as like a cluster, and it just manages it by itself. But yeah, it's lots of moving parts, right? Like even in that sentence, I think I've like just used like names of 4 different technologies like that you need to like really like have a better understanding of to run like something at this scale. But I also want to say that this is needed. Like Berkeley runs things at scale, and we sort of are also on like the cutting edge of a bunch of things, and that's why we have stuff that's like this complicated. But in most cases, I would say that the way that like you would pick up either 0 to Jupyter Hub or a Jupyter Hub and go through the docs there. But like soon you will hit something like Kubernetes, for example, like you encounter this and it's something that feel like you need to have better understanding of, because it's an open source community itself. It has its own documentation, and its own sort of tutorials that you can dive into and learn. Now, this is both a great thing and a terrible thing. It's great because then you can dive into it and learn it, but it's also terrible because sometimes you have no choice but to dive into and learn it. So yeah, we are building things out of parts, and that means that sometimes you do need to learn what the parts are. But yeah,
well, I guess
mostly you would need to do that if you can just like, yeah.
Maybe I should refine the question. Is that in one of the talks on the web that you guys, I forget his name, he did about the infrastructure, there were kind of these like scenarios or recipes. Like if you have a class and it's between this to this, then you use the little Jupyter Hub or whatever. And again, like I understand the Littlest Jupiter Hub, but I don't know what other things, like if I want to have the Autograder, like how many pieces do I need? Like, in other words, even if it was like, there's this scenario, and there's this scenario. If you want something else, you have to mix and match and figure it out yourself. I get that. But I still don't know all the pieces. I know one of the pieces that, okay, you guys are recommending Littlest Jupiter Hub. If it's 50 classes or less, get a VM and just fire it up. Okay, that's fine. But I still don't have a binder thing on that. And do I do that on the public, or you know what I'm saying? Like,
right. So I understand that. So I think for a data 8 style stuff, and for most of it, I think the missing piece has been a grader. And I think that's why Chris Piles, I don't know if Chris Piles is here. The Autograder situation has been like a problem. And I think Autograder, when that fixed up, it might just get integrated a little Jupyter Hub. So anyway, to go back, that is one of the reasons we have not been able to have a document that just says like, okay, to have data 8, you need like these 2 things, because it's just like difficult to actually find a list of all of them that works for it, for like well together in a way that you can just say, the same way as Littlest Jupyter Hub, like here, follow these 4 steps, it's just going to work. And I think Otter is going to be at a stage where you can do that, and that's going to make that easier. But Chris Piles, I don't know if he's here, might be able to give you a better answer than that on me. But no, I feel your pain. I agree with you that this should be better.
What about the binder connection? Is that already built in?
I don't fully understand how binder would fit into this.
Just that the students can click on a link and it opens up in the Jupyter. Is that NB?
Right.
Is that part of your system?
Right.
Or
yeah, so NB Git Puller is built into both 0 to Jupyter Hub and Littlest Jupyter Hub because we figured most people would use it. So yeah, it is built into it.
Okay.
Yeah, and in the Littlest Jupyter Hub documentation, there is something on how you can use the built-in NB Git Puller.
Sorry, hello, I'm Chris, everybody. Touching back on the Autograder question, I kind of want to just separate the issue of Autograders from the Hub issue. I feel like Otter is designed so that it's not necessarily integrated into your Jupyter Hub infrastructure. It's something we want to go into that direction more, but as of right now, it's basically just a Python package. So your installation of Jupyter Hub and Otter are completely separate. Otter is agnostic of your Jupyter Hub distribution. It's basically just a Python package you can specify in a requirements.txt and pip install. So, and the same goes for other auto grading services like OKpy. OKpy has the weirdness of you have to contact Professor De Niro to set up the server. But I think in general, unless you're using something like NVGrader, autograders are kind of a separate issue from your Jupyter Hub installation.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I understand. I'm just trying to like get a list. Let's say I'm doing this next semester. What do I, what are all the checks I have to, check boxes I have to tick? And that's kind of what I'm thinking. But okay, thanks.
It might be good to just quickly differentiate the binder thing as well. Like, so binder is a Jupyter Hub that's open to the world, and the textbook for Data 8 uses binder links as a way that anyone in the world can open a Jupyter notebook from the textbook. But you don't need to worry about implementing that for your specific class.
But you do have it for the labs. I mean, at least I was doing the edX version where you could click on, the lab and it would open up and then you get your instance. So that's kind of binder-like.
Oh, yeah. So that was what Yuvi was talking about, which is the interact links, NB git puller links.
Okay, got it.
And those are an important, very important part of teaching a class with Yuvi's workflow, where it's those links itself that populate each student's directory.
Terrific. Okay.
I have a little walkthrough on that in my video on YouTube.
Awesome. I'll take a look. Thank you so much.
There's a bunch of questions accumulating in the chat, and somebody had their hand raised.
What?
Hand raised.
I think I can just.
Yeah.
I think Maria is the person in the chat who asked, like, what is a Jupyter Hub? We should have opened with that. I'm sorry about that. So if you're using the workshop link that the other meetings today have been using, that's a Jupyter Hub. So instead of installing Jupyter on your local computer in some form with Anaconda or Conda or something and setting it up, you would instead just go to a website and then log in, and then you will have a Jupyter notebook and whatever else packages are already installed. So the idea is, if you have a number of students, you don't have to start day zero by having them, download something, install it on their computer, have it not work, and then email you asking for questions, and then you have to provide tech support. Instead of that, just give them a link. They go and log in with some credentials, and then it just works, and then they can do it all through their browser. So Jupyter Hub is really this kind of server somewhere that lets you provide that to multiple users at the same time. I hope that was a useful answer, Maria. Thank you.
Maria, we wouldn't say that Colab is like Jupyter. I mean, it's like Colab for Jupyter. We would say it the other way around, I think.
Okay, Matthew Brett has a question on how much time it is to maintain this. So I think once you have it set up, it's very minimal. Most of my and Jonathan Felder, so me and Jonathan Felder are the people who are currently on paid staff time to work on this. And most of our time, we spend maybe, I don't know, 40 hours during summer, just cleaning things up and setting it up. But during the course of the semester, unless we are actively working on some new features, which we are, if we are just doing maintenance, I would say it's going to be maybe 2 to 4 hours a month at most. Does that sound good, Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about this infrastructure that continuously surprises me, is just how well it works once it's all set up and running. I mean, the vast majority, I think, of our work when we're maintaining this is basically looking for ways to further optimize, infrastructure, right? So that we can keep our costs down, Right now, we're doing a lot of work with storage and figuring out exactly how we want to lay that out. But as a general case, like, yeah, once this thing is running, it pretty much takes care of itself for the most part, which is really pretty nice.
And we've also been able to upstream almost all of our changes into Jupyter Hub and the upstream open source projects, which is great because then other people also help take care of that. So yeah, it's not been that much. And as for what help, that is like the regular Jupyter community channels, the Jupyter discourse, which I will put a link to, is actually pretty active. And I know that there is a nonprofit consortium called 2i2c that is in the process of bootstrapping itself to help with maintaining a setup like this for universities and other science/education spaces. I think like James and other people from that are giving a talk or something like that here, Eric. Do you have more details on when that is? You're muted.
On Friday, the last panel will have people from CloudBank, which wants to do a similar thing, and 2i2c, which is also thinking about doing a similar thing, which is providing Jupyter Hub sort of across institutions in the public way. There's also a panel for commercial vendors of different people who are doing company-based implementation of Jupyter that support classes as well.
Okay. I think Michael Grossberg had another question about authentication. And yeah, so at Berkeley, we have Canvas for like that's the normal CMS being used. So we authenticate with Canvas. It's called B courses here. And we also, like in some hubs, we also like Google, like Berkeley also has Google Apps account. So everyone like has a Berkeley email, actually has a Google account. So we use that as well, depending on like the particular hub. But like Jupyter Hub supports like a large amount of authenticators, LDAP, Active Directory, GitHub, just, you know, like, or in the workshop case, right? Just like a shared password, lots of them are supported. The second question was about persistence and storage. For user home directories, they get a home directory where we support kind of like a gigabyte, we don't actually have limits there. But like most students don't use up too much space. We like just wrote up a policy on what will happen to them. And right now the plan is if they haven't used any of it for like a year, we will like tarball it, email it to them and delete it. But we haven't actually had to do that yet. Storage is surprisingly cheap and surprisingly expensive at the same time. And for shared large data sets, we've done this for neuroscience and stuff in the past, where we have, you know, like just like it's just NFS. So you have like a small directory where like, you know, the admins or whoever is teaching the class can just go and put whatever files they want, and that will be made available in a read-only fashion to a bunch of other people. So yeah, I hope that was a useful answer, Michael. And I see that Lee has provided some more links to authenticators, and thanks, Lee. Matthew Brett's question was, is a week realistic to get used to the ideas and get set up? I have like slightly more context on who Matthew Brett is, so I want to say yes. But yeah, if you have, I would say that like in my experience, the line has been, if you have an understanding of how Docker works, then getting set up on like a large system like how we have is not particularly difficult. And if you're setting up the Littlest Jupiter Hub, which is much smaller, then like, yeah, it's designed to be done in like a much shorter period of time, like 30 minutes or so. But yeah, to set up a system the way we have, and if you already know, like, you know, like a good amount of system administration stuff, yeah, a week seems reasonable. Okay. Chris Holdgraf apparently just joined. He's one of the people who wrote Jupyter book and is involved in a lot of other Jupyter ecosystem things. So you can ask him questions too. Yertai has a question about how to adopt the data 8 materials. I think, Eric, you might have an answer to that. You're muted, Eric. You're muted again.
I think Chris Holdgraf wrote a book about that, and it just got updated.
About adapting data 8?
Yeah.
Yeah, let me grab the link. So there's a guide called 0 to Data 8 that I'm going to paste into the chat room right now. So that guide covers a lot of the high-level pedagogical decisions that were made as a part of Data 8, sort of the reasoning behind why it's structured the way that it is. And it also has links to some of the materials for Data 8 itself and instructions for like how you can take those notebooks and the content there and adapt them for your own course. There's also an infrastructure guide called the Data Science Educator's Guide to Technology Infrastructure. And while some of that covers things like Jupyter Hub and more of that kind of infrastructure, I think that it also covers things like Jupyter Book, which is used to build the Data 8 textbook as well. So I would check both of those things out for more information there.
I mean, some of it's the mental model, right? Like you have your littlest, in the Yertai case, you have your Jupyter Hub set up. It's running. People can log into it. I think he has authentication for everyone at Fresno State using like a Google Auth. And then you have your cloned repo of your Data 8 material, and it's the NB Git puller that's like the linkage between those two. Like you don't need your Data 8 materials to be in the same place as your Jupyter Hub implementation. We got questions from Matt and Mike.
Someone's raising their hand, but it's gone now. Oh, I think that was Yatai, and I think their questions just answered. There was a question from Michael Diane. The question was, if they have a large number of students and using the Littlest Jupiter Hub, can you have multiple VMs to reduce the cost instead of one large VM? You could, there are probably ways to do that, but at that point, I often recommend people just use like a container orchestration system. But if you really don't want to, you can just have two hubs called Hub 1, Hub 2, and when your class starts, you just say like, all you people use Hub 1 and all you people use Hub 2. And you can just, like do sharding like that, and that should work. But often I find that if you're on a cloud provider, paying for one VM that is 16 gigs is about the same amount of money as paying for two VMs of 8 gigs each. So it might be useful to find ways to optimize around that. But yeah, if you can't just have two VMs, just have them different names and then tell people which ones to use, should work just as well. David Lin has a question about how Jupyter Hub handles GPU and CUDA. It gives you, you can have it set up to give you access to the GPU and CUDA. You cannot, one user cannot share like a GPU at the same time as many others. There is a really nice and frustrating document someone has written about this, and I will find it and link it to you here. Okay, yeah, I've just shared it. Michael Grossberg has another question of, do you have totally separate hubs for each class? Or there's some server that splits after the login? So this is mostly handled for us by Kubernetes. We basically just say, give us space for 2 gigs of RAM and like, half of a CPU, and it'll figure out what node to place it in and do all of the scheduling work for us. We generally try to keep everything in the same hub, and we usually only separate into different hubs for like social reasons rather than technical reasons. So yeah, like the R hub is there to signal support for R, and the Data 100 hub is there because we are doing more complex things there. While like I think the Prob 140 hub is there because there are some people who are taking Prob 140 who are Data 8 TAs and they don't want to mix that. But in general, yeah, like all of this, like multiple servers splitting, etc., is handled by Kubernetes for us, and we don't really have to deal with that. I think Matthew Brett has another OKpy question.
I can give a partial answer to that question. So I guess the original reason why OKpy uses dog test format is because at its original, the basis level, it was to check actually Python executables rather than Jupyter notebooks for CS61A. And this whole Jupyter notebook thing was later tacked on there. Why they decided to use dog tests is something known only to Professor De Niro. But that is kind of the format that we're left with right now. Otter uses it because Otter is supposed to be somewhat backwards compatible with OKpy. And I think that the dog test format has some serious problems, but is not something that we're really in a position to change from right now. So if you would like to write tests in another way, there are, of course, testing modules out there that you can jerry-rig into Autograders. But unfortunately, I feel like the dog test format is something we're kind of stuck with for right now.
So Yertai has a question about whether students experience significant waiting time while the Docker image is loading. So both like us and a bunch of other people in the Jupyter Hub community, particularly someone called Eric Sundell, have put a bunch of effort into optimizing that. So what we generally do is we pre-pull the images before the students get on it. So the start time is usually mostly instant, maybe at most like a second or something like that. Just to complete, Yertai has I will send you links on the chat on where this pre-pulling happens and how to make that work. I think Matthew Brett asked why we don't use NWDSE, which I think is for Eric.
Why we don't use NWDSE? Well, I guess there's an interesting, we could loop this back to something that we've already talked about, right? That part of, for me, I would call it like Yuvi and Ryan's architectural vision is that there's one hub that works really well for all of the different classes. And the NWDSE situation is more like each hub is set up for each class. So there's one architectural choice there. There's also a bunch of engineering stuff around NWDSE and Kubernetes that I think that where the Data 8 implementation moved faster into the Kubernetes and sort of needed to do the scalability to have 2,000 people on it every day, where NWDSE is just now catching up to be able to work in the Kubernetes world. So there's multiple reasons why it just wasn't working on our implementation, and our choice was more like a flexible hub that, you know, you populate your directory iteratively in real time using NB-Git puller links. So it's also just like it's a different way of like specifying things. As we just mentioned, historically, there were reasons that the person that came up with Data 8 had been using OKpy and they had another system to go with. So nobody was working on implementation of NBGrader. So there's multiple reasons. We're hopeful about Otter as something that will be really flexible and will fit into multiple use cases. And the people on this call and at this workshop being like people new and adopting in a smaller setting, we're hoping that Otter will be able to be something that they can take on. You know, it's still in its infancy. It's still like writing the documentation. But the fact that it could work, you know, we're currently using it with Gradescope. You could use it with your own little virtual machine. It could be, you know, interacting with different cloud vendors or different service model vendors in different ways. We're hopeful that there's a future there.
Okay, if nobody's asking questions, I'll ask Eric questions.
Yeah, I was going to ask you.
Oh no, someone did. Multiple questions. Eric, you have been saved. Michael Dan's question was how difficult it is to set up Jupyter Hub on a HPC. Totally depends on your HPC. No two HPC clusters in the world are alike. So the many HPC systems have Jupyter Hub set up, so it's completely possible, and it should actually be not very difficult. And yeah, asking in the Jupyter discourse with a little bit more information about the HPC setup you have, and how much rights you have on it, which often ends up being the more important question, should give you much more useful pointers. But yeah, it should be very doable. You're not blazing a new path. It's fairly well documented. Oh, no worries. Thank you for asking. Michael Grosberg question of if you would recommend Otter over OKpy right now, unless you need large scale. So Eric, Chris Piles, yeah.
Yeah, so I would say OKpy is kind of becoming something of a legacy service. It's my understanding that the OKpy server doesn't actually do any grading directly anymore. So if you are at such a scale where you can manage your own grading infrastructure, something like Data 100's past Pandas Grader, Autograder, then that is an option. Otherwise, I would say you might be better off something more like Otter, where the infrastructure is abstracted away to something like a third-party LMS or something that you're running locally. I hope that helps. But yeah, I mean, OKpy is becoming more and more of just a platform for assignment collection and also a client API that allows students to run checks in the notebook.
Yeah, Gopher Grader is being replaced by Otter. I saw that question in there. Oh yeah, Chris is answering it.
Yeah, regarding Blackboard. So currently Otter is integrated somewhat very integrated with Gradescope, somewhat integrated with Canvas, because that is the LMS stack that we have at Berkeley right now. Blackboard integration might be something that is in the future for Otter, but as of right now, it's not something that we're working on. We would like to, for obvious reasons, and I mean, using Blackboard. Blackboard is a very common LMS, so expansion into that direction is something that is on the roadmap, but is not something that is under active development.
So Yada has a question about Jupyter Hub versions, and I think it's talking about version 0.9. So this, I think, goes back to like one of, I think Michael Grossberg asked this question of like just many moving parts. So I think the version 0.9 is for the Jupyter Hub on Kubernetes distribution, which is separate from Jupyter Hub itself, which is a different version, is separate from Littlest Jupyter Hub. But in this case, I think this version 9 is for 0 to Jupyter Hub, and it is the latest version. But I will find the change logs, and I will just link them on the chat, and that should give you a better understanding. That should list all the changes that have actually happened. Change log.
Yuvi, you want to ask each other questions?
Yeah. What is the pedagogical thing that you're most excited to try for next semester or summer?
For me, Eric.
For you, Eric. I mean, more like for you from what you've seen in the last few days or heard from people in the last few weeks, maybe been talking to them, not you specifically.
Well, I guess, there's like a looming dark thing out there that's student engagement, right? Like what we just had was a semester that started out fine and then COVID happened and it crashed. And it was kind of interesting to see your Grafana, and you could basically see the spring break and COVID both effects. It was like an interesting data science problem. And like there's just less people on Data Hub, and there's like people dropping classes and stuff. There's just a whole bunch of reasons that the university's running into a dark tunnel right now. So I love the Jupyter Hub. I think that teaching this way is the way to go for online, right? It's a really great way for people to be doing awesome work wherever they are. It's like total asset. But there's something about engagement. There's something about doing it with other people. There's something about what Data 8 is a win because Jupyter Hub's there and it's awesome, but people are like have their hands held while they learn coding in a friendly way. And so for me, like Yuvi has been inventing something that's like, could we have chat inside Jupyter Lab, or could we have a way to interact inside the window? Lots of people are asking about real-time collaboration, like how long will it take for Jupyter Hub to come up with something real-time collaboration? I guess what I like to think about as an instructor is something like, gamifying and making widgetifying and making, I guess stuff where like the students interact with the notebooks and that contributes. We've started doing stuff of like, Chris Pyle started making things where like there's a form in the notebook, and so people can enter data in their notebook and they can, be answering a poll or doing something like some way that like multiple people on multiple notebooks can feel like they're part of a class or part of a community. And there's many, many ways that this might be engineered. But I think this is the future that we all need to work on in the next few months of this online semester, where like how to not lose people, right? It's not just like sit at home and do college. We got to help, and we got to engineer into the space that it's like engaging. And I hate to say it because I'm against it, but like gamification and badges and interaction, like the whole rest of the internet has like got people really well like gamified. I don't know what it is. It's not about the leaderboard in your class, but it's something about where there's some interaction. It's not just you alone in your notebook. I don't know. Happy to collaborate on that. Happy to think of other ideas. I don't have an answer, but I think that's probably one of the most pressing things.
Yeah, we're currently working on integrating video chat and screen sharing into Jupyter Lab, and after that, possibly on being able to having students being able to send files to each other and see how your notebook is different than mine in a way that's pretty easy. So yeah, as Eric said, like this is really the biggest challenge, and like it's gonna be much more important than like shaving an extra $1 off something here, because ultimately none of that matters if you can't actually provide an appropriate education. So I think a lot of the people on this, like, Berkeley is great or whatever, but, we also have a very privileged set of like experiences as the kind of university it is. So I know that like a lot of people on this will have much more diverse needs and ideas. So please let us know, because they'll be interesting and fun to work on as well, but also useful.
Hey, everybody, I got to jump off to go to the next panel, but super thanks for your time, and I'll let you guys wrap up.
All right. Bye, Ray.
Thank you so much to our speakers. I think we can wrap it up. Feel free to post questions on Slack and join us for the next panel on human context and ethics. Thank you so much.
Bye.